If you want to be able to be successful in your academic journey, you need to be open to change. It's not about how hard you work, but it's about how smart you work. Hi, everyone. My name is Pandim Shunwale. Today, I'll be taking you through a very important video. Really changed my academic perspective. Really, the context behind this video is that I numerously, on a number of occasions, get a lot of requests from students and my mentees asking, how do I excel academically? How do I become a top student? How do I pass in a record time? And most of the time, most of the questions can be answered by a simple answer, which is get your study strategy correct, apply the right principles, and those go a long way in ensuring that you become successful. And that's why the 24-hour rule is important, and I'll be taking you through it today. And by way of background, there are a lot of principles that guide you in being able to be a good student. I've wrote an article about it, and if you're interested, you can look at it in my LinkedIn. But effectively, this is the most important one, which is the 24-hour rule. So, what are the key challenges that students tend to face? And I was not immune to this, guys, because I too had to transition from being a poor student to a good student. Have you ever felt like it takes too long for you to study? Or maybe you feel like the tutorials, there's so many and you don't get a time to do all of them. Or you're not retaining information the way you're supposed to. For example, you study hard for that test or exam, only to find that 2 weeks later you forgot that information. Or if you find yourself sleep deprived, always tired. These are some of the common problems that we typically face as students, and they hinder your potential to do well. This is a typical learning pyramid. Now, the learning pyramid is designed to be an effective guide on how one should ideally be learning in order to maximize their academic potential. Now, as you can see, it goes from step 1 to 6, where step 1 is the pre-reading phase and step 6 is teaching others. You will notice that the step 1 block is relatively narrow and small, representing the fact that you get the least amount of benefit from pre-reading compared to teaching others, which is the largest block at the bottom, which represents the fact that you get the most out of this teaching block. Now, how does one get through the cycle? Because you might be asking me, if step number 4, 5, and 6 seem to be the biggest chunks of the learning experience, why don't I just jump and go into tutorials and evaluating, consulting, and teaching others and avoid wasting my time on post reading and attending classes, which are relatively small in terms of from a benefit point of view? Now, the important issue that you need to kind of grapple with here is that the learning process is fluid. That is, if you jump to step 4, 5, and 6, what will end up happening is that you will learn the art of rote learning or learn the art of memorizing. And this is the problem, because if you do multiple questions, you will memorize how to do those questions. But the minute I provide a curveball to you in a test and exam, you'll be unable to grapple with that curveball. In contrast, if I've built up an expectation from pre-reading, attending classing, and post-reading, and now I've got an expected approach of how I want to deal with the problem, then I go to the tutorial and I apply that expectation. I find out that that expectation is the same. I build up my confidence because I've compared what I thought was the answer versus what is the answer, and I've tested myself under exam conditions. Now I can already see that, yes, I know what I'm doing. Or alternatively, I don't know what I'm doing. I thought this was the right answer, but in actual fact, it isn't. Now the question becomes, why am I getting it wrong? And it's that process of asking the question, why am I getting things wrong? Why are things not the way that I expected them to be, which is what we call evaluating and consulting, is when the real learning takes place. So, do not deprive yourself of that benefit of comparing expected results with your actual results and determining where you're getting it wrong, because that's the crux of you learning. And that's why it's important to go through each and every step in the learning pyramid. Do not skip a single step because it's critical for your own benefit and to maximize your academic potential. Now, the question you might be asking me is that that's all well and good. Tell me that I need to get through this learning cycle. Practically, how do I do that with all the jam-packed classes, the assignments? There's just not enough time for me to do this. Enter the 24-hour rule. Now, the 24-hour rule, at its basic core premise, says that I must study the information, i.e., step 3 here, which was post reading. I must post read whatever I learned in the class within 24 hours. So, what that does, it provides you the advantage of being able to leverage of the freshness of that content, the tricks and tips that the lecturer has given you, so that you can swift through the information and be able to pick up from the textbook what is important, what isn't. You can have a narrow focus as you post read. And ultimately, what you end up doing is studying faster. And that's what the 24-hour rule does. It allows you to move through the learning cycle quickly, and it is also a key tool to manage time. Now, we've unpacked what the 24-hour rule is and the advantages in terms of time management. But how does it practically apply? Now, we're going to look at an example that is going to basically help us answer this question as to how do we apply the 24-hour rule so that we are more effective students. Now, this is a typical exam timetable of a student in their third year of studies. And as you can see, they've done the first thing correct, which is they've outlined each and every activity on a daily basis from Monday to Sunday that they're doing. Now, this is the first critical point that I must stress to everyone here is that you must outline each and every activity that you're doing within your timetable first. Now, this could be typically lectures, it could be you go to church, you see your friends, or you play sports, whatever it is, start with everything that you cannot avoid, put it on your timetable. So this student is sort of like a simple student for this example, in that they don't really have a lot of commitments, which is probably ideal for any type of student looking to do well. They only have the classes and then they've got supper and rest. So basically, their supper is gymming or jogging or doing whatever they have to do. And then obviously, this student has done a second thing correct, which is they sleeping at a consistent time. Now, I cannot stress this enough that sleep is critical if you want to become an academically astute student. If you want to be the best and be a top student, you need to sleep because it is when you sleep that the information is transferred from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. And it's your long-term memory that you need when the exams come and the tests come and you need to display that competence. You need to display the appreciation of the rules and to show that you know what you're doing. So very important to sleep is critical. So I always advise my mentees that get a good 7 to 8 hours of sleep is important if you want to do well. Now, third thing to note is that the learning cycle always starts when you have your first lecture. So up until you have your first lecture, you can do whatever you want at that stage, right? But when the first lecture starts, that's when the new cycle starts. And if you recall, we had step 1, which was pre-reading, step 2, attending classes, step 3, post-reading. So it's very critical that for this student, once 10 o'clock hits and they attend that auditing class, hopefully in that auditing class, they'll pay attention, they'll ask the right questions. And in this video, we haven't really covered the learning strategies in terms of how do you excel in class, how do you have a lecture strategy, probably a video for another day. But ultimately, assuming that that student now understands that they have to pay attention in class, the 24-hour rule is beginning to kick in. So they would then attend class for lecture, which is auditing, from 10 to 12, as you can see. Then from 12, they'll have another lecture, um, which is taxation, which is combined with lunch in this case. So they start with lunch for like 30 minutes and then go to tax up until 2. Now, this is important. Whenever there's free time, there's a potential for you to plug in study periods. Now, the 24-hour rule, if you recall, says study the information that you were coaching class within 24 hours. So this student would say, might as well do my auditing and I post read. And they'd probably want to do that for 2 hours. So notice what they've done. They're matching the time they spend in class with the time they actually post read, right? And that's important because for you to be effective, you want to learn effectively. So 2 hours should be enough. Within that 2 hours, you can decide how you want to structure it, whether you want to study in 30-minute chunks or 45-minute chunks or 15-minute chunks. It's really up to you as long as you're productive within that period. Right. So they've studied auditing and they've post-read, and hopefully whatever was covered in that class, they've already covered it here. Now it will be tricky, I will admit, in the first few times you apply this approach, but over time, as you get better, you will find that it becomes easier to match what you learned in class with what you're doing in your post-reading, i.e., you're able to make your notes, highlight your legislations or standards within that period of time. Then the student has supper and rest from 6 o'clock, from 4 o'clock, sorry, to 6 o'clock. Then they've got free time again, and then they'll say, let me do some taxation. I want to post read some tax here. Post read, post read some tax. So again, because they had a 2 hour lecture effectively, then they post read for 2 hours again. Now, hopefully, if they've done it correctly at this stage, they'll be able to say whatever was covered in that week's auditing and taxation, they're done. They've covered the content. Now they'll have free time from, and we call this open, they'll have free time from 8 to 11. Now, this free time can be used quite strategically. They can decide, for example, let's say auditing class, right, was jam-packed. There was a lot of content, and they were not able to get it done in the 2 hour session. Well, because I recommend changing your subjects interchangeably so that you don't spend a lot of time. Because I feel the longer you spend on a single subject, comparatively speaking, for every additional minute, there's no benefit for you. So you're better off trying to basically change the subject so that you refresh the mind and it's able to operate in an ideal manner. So let's say, for example, you've learned and now you haven't uh, really covered that content auditing, then you can use one of the sessions to continue with auditing or continue with taxation, whatever you feel like you need help with or you need to catch up on. Or sometimes you would have done the content the way you're supposed to. You've covered the auditing class for the day and the taxation class for the day, but now you might have some other work from other weeks that's still behind, and then this would be a good time for you to do it. And just on that, I'm a firm believer that one should not try to catch up. That is, if you're behind with last week's work, don't try to catch up in a way that will interfere with the benefit of attending a class. Because when you attend a class, that's when you're able to leverage of the fact that the information is still fresh, that the lecturer has guided you so that you're able to learn quicker. And I would only start catching up in periods like this, like when there's open time. Do not allow your catching up interfere. That is, as you can see, this student did not catch up before they actually studied the work for that day. They firstly covered that work for that day. Once they were good, then they realized that open time, and only then they can start looking at that work. So do not allow the week's work to be interfered with in terms of last week's work that you didn't cover. Okay, now, now as you can see, that's how the 24-hour rule would work. And how would this practice apply for other days? Now we're going to go relatively quicker because I think we all get it. You attend the class for FINAC from 8 to 9. Then they would put you to some free time. They'll say FINAC post read, right? They'll post read FINAC. So essentially now again, by the time they hit 4 o'clock, they would have covered the content that was covered here in the morning for FINAC, done, they've highlighted the standard, they've made their notes, they've done the class examples. Then they go to supper and they rest. Then 6 o'clock, again, they start working. Now they'll look at it and say, okay, I've got a manfin tat. Typically in tutorials, we've got something called an unseen. And assuming that you're a good student now, you would have covered all your prescribed tutorials. So the only new information that you should be seeing in that tutorial is an unseen. So you'd effectively come in here and you're unseen for Manfred, right? Consolidated in your own words. so that it makes sense. Then you'd come in again and say, I had a class for auditing, so I need to post read my auditing. So I post read my auditing, and that's effectively a 2 hour session that's being conducted here. Auditing done. Now, the student, again, by the time it hits 9 o'clock, they've covered the FINA content for the day. They've covered the auditing content for the day that was covered in the class. Potentially now they could look at it and say, hey, I've got some free time. And typically for subjects that are are more practical, like auditing, it might be that they don't need both these sessions. For example, they could have done post reading in the 1 hour, then already they're starting with tutorials here in the second session that could continue again with some audit tutorials, because given the nature of the subject and how practical it is, you could want to look at doing some audit tutorials. And then you really want to then change it up. Don't want to study too much here. So then what you would do is that, because you've already covered a bit of FINAC, right? Then you'd say, okay, was I able to finish that FINAC post reading that was done here? If I wasn't, I'll use this period. So this would be another open period. I can use it, potentially catch up my FINAC if I didn't finish all the content here in the 2 hours. Or alternatively, I could post read for tomorrow's class for FINAC, or I could simply do some catch up, whatever I need to do. But the important thing is that I've covered the work that was covered in class within that day, within 24 hours, which is the key thing. Then you'd wake up on a Wednesday with some free time here. There's no such thing as free time, guys. You want to wake up every day. This student is sleeping at 11, and ideally they're probably waking up at 6, half 6, and then by 8 o'clock, they're at it again working. So it's very important to sleep at a consistent time and wake up at a consistent time, no matter what. So therefore, you'd say, okay, since auditing is done, the lectures are done, already I can start doing my auditing tutorials that are prescribed. Let me do my auditing tutorials. Right. So we're going to call these auditing tutorials TP. TP standing for you doing the practice tutorials, i.e. the prescribed tutorials for for the week for auditing. Already you're starting to unlock some time for yourself. Then FINAC lectures, you attend them from 10 to 12, then Manfin and FEN, then auditing tasks. And then again, there's free time again at 6 o'clock for sup and rest. Then you'd come in to say, I studied or I attended a class for FINAC. So therefore, I need to post read FINAC here. During this free time, I post read FINAC, whatever was covered in the class. I make sure I covered it within the period. Then there's Manfin. Then I want to post read Manfin. Manfin post read. I'm going to cover my Manfin post read. And then I do that over a 2 hour session again. Hopefully, then you would have covered this. And then perhaps we had an auditing cut here, so there could have been an unseen, for example. Or if it's the first week that you're doing it, because usually tutorials are a week behind, then you could leave it open. Right? And open means, let's say there's a content that you didn't get to do within Finax, you put it in here. And I think you're getting the flow of it at the moment. Right. Now, what did you do on a Thursday? Same process. Attending classes for lecture, FINAC, free time. Now, this is important. There's no such thing as free time. Every hour counts, guys. So the fact that you have this hour, take advantage of it and say, okay, I'm going to study my taxation here. I'm going to post read tax. So that hour makes a difference in the bigger scheme of things. Then you go to class for lectures, for Manfred, supper, free time again at 6. What do? I continue my tax. I post read my tax here. Again, 24-hour rule, whatever was covered in the class, already covered by the time 87 for tax. Then I had FINAC, probably there's going to be an unseen for FINAC. And then I do that unseen for FINAC. Then from there, I can look and say, okay, Manfin, post read Manfin. Then I post read Manfin again here. Now again, you can leave this as an open. Now, this will all depend, guys. Say, let's say, for example, sometimes the text content was too much for that day. You needed more than the 2 hours. Then you can come in to say, I need another hour. So let me study text here. And then you study text. Sometimes you could ask yourself and say, perhaps I can do another tutorial of auditing, whatever works for you. But what's important is that this student, what they've done, they've made sure the lecture content for that day is done. It's complete. Always prioritize your lecture content. Make sure you study it within 24 hours. Once that's done, you have open spaces that you can do to either catch up, do tutorials in order to find yourself ahead. Then in the morning, again, there's no such thing as you guys would have already realized with me. I don't believe in free time. So what you could potentially do here is to say, let me do some auditing charts, perhaps, or I could do an auditing chart here, for example. Um, just trying to, because the classes are done here, then I could attend tags again. Then I have my lunch period. Then probably I want to do an unseen, right? And your unseen is basically saying, okay, let me go in and do whatever the unseen was for tax, consolidate for all my own knowledge. Then I still got some free time, right? Uh, Now, potentially, you could say, because another subject that's down is FINAC now. So I could start doing my FINAC cuts. So I can already start doing my FINAC cuts, then SAP and rest. Now, at this stage, guys, it's all relative. So for me, I never believed in working too much on a Friday. So by the time it hit 4 o'clock, I was done for the day. I went to supper. And then for me, this was a break. So I decided to make this a break so that I can relax. Now, obviously, guys, this will depend if you're writing tests or if you're behind with your work, you can use this to catch up. But assuming that you've been a good student during the week, you're up to date now with all your lectures, you've post-read in all your lectures, and you've actually attempted some of the tutorials for auditing and FINAC already for the week and other subjects. So this is a nice time to reward yourself for all the hard work you've put in for the week. And that's important psychologically as well because brains, our brains respond to rewards. And if you're giving yourself a nice reward like this, you will be motivated to work optimally during the week. So I always believed in having a break here on a Friday. So I'll take a break. Then Saturday and Sunday, it's all about doing tutorials, all about doing tutorials. For me, those were tutorial days. So this student would wake up and then they'd say, okay, text tats, for example, text tat, they do text tats here, right? Yeah, text tats, they do the text tats. Now, okay, guys, obviously, some of the tats are long, they could be longer than 2 hours, so you might need 3 sessions, right? Some tats are short. Just make sure that you incorporate the time it takes for you to mark and so forth. So perhaps you probably want to do like maybe a 3 session for tags there. That's probably for your longer charts. Then maybe you can start maybe a short Finnac tat, a short Manfin tat here. So you don't have to finish it. You just do a short Manfin tat for an hour. Then lunch. Then you can come back and maybe mark that Manfin tat. Come and mark it over here. Manfin tat, you mark it. Then another subject we haven't been focusing on is Finnac tat. Uh, Now it's up to you. You can do a long maybe Finnac tat here, then go and mark it again. Finnac tat, you go and mark it, whatever. You do it here, supper rest, then mm, maybe you might think, okay, audit tat. I haven't done an audit tat in a while. Then you do audit tat. Potentially by this stage, maybe you would have been done with all your auditing tutorials because you've already done some during the week, but you're just doing them here. Then do some audit parts. Then maybe you come back here and then you want to maybe mark, maybe doing the auditing cuts, longer ones. And then potentially you could do one short one for tax again. Then you go and sleep. Then you go and sleep again. When as you go and sleep Sunday, right? So that this was really a jam-packed day where you just did a lot of questions on Saturday. Then on Sunday, what you could potentially do again is look at it and say, okay, what can I do now? I've done tax. Maybe I can wake up, tax, and mark whatever tutorial I did there for tax. And I can maybe do a man fin touch, touch, man touch, man touch practice, TP, man touch. Maybe mark it here, man touch practice, mark it here. Or you could do two charts depending on how long the tutorials are for the week. Could be two or one, and just incorporate marking time. And obviously, guys, as you do these tutorials, do them under exam pressure, please. It not only saves you time, but you also practice that skill. Then you probably want to go to lunch here. And after lunch, you come back and you probably want to say, okay, then you go back to Finactat, Finactat, maybe another Finactat here. Do a Finactat, you go to supper, you rest, then you come back here again. Then you'll be like, okay, maybe I need to do some text tats again, text tats, text tats. It's just up to you. But again, guys, everyone is different. Everyone is different. But what you could potentially do as well is that it's just up to you how you want to structure it. Where other people might be like, okay, on a Sunday, I want to take a break. At this stage, you probably would have done most, if not all, your tutorials. Then you take a break again over here. Then you have 2 half days. Others might say, let's say you've got church here, and then you want to do the questions here. So maybe you've got your FINAC here. So I typically fell into the category of the people who didn't do any work here after lunch. So for me, this was time for me to go to church, and literally I would block that out. It's also a time to rest, right? But rather than I'd come back and then do touch for Finag, then again maybe some man fin or what's a subject I haven't done here in a while, probably text, touch, text touch, text touch. Cool. I think everyone is getting the hang of it, how the Monday works. Now you're opening yourself up time to be able to do the tutorials. And effectively, this should be a good way for you to do well and be able to manage your time. Notice how also that we always make sure that we give ourselves enough rest as well. If you can see the student, they have a break on a Friday, they also have a break again on a Sunday, where typically they don't work here from about 12 to about 6. So they take a nice break here. So it's up to you. I always believed in half days. So this student is taking 2 half days essentially. Others might decide that I work flat out for 6 days and then take a break on one day. It's all up to you as long as you make sure that by the time Friday hits, you've post-read all your lectures and you've allocated enough time to do your tutorials within the period. Now Monday rocks up again. There's no such thing as free time, right? So and now I'm looking at there's a Manfin Tut coming up really soon. So I might want to look at Manfin Tuts here. I haven't done. Maybe do some Manfin Tuts and then do maybe another Manfin Tut here. Cool. Then by this stage, hopefully I would have done all my tuts for Manfin and I'll be ready to go to that tutorial. Then the process starts again for the next cycle. Audit, audit, audit. The process starts again. And the nice thing is that now that I've left this as open, right? But perhaps maybe there were so many tutorials that I didn't get enough time. So I could potentially go into this open session and say, oh, why don't I do maybe an auditing tat if I didn't finish all my auditing tats or a FINAC tat or something like that. I can still use this time to do tutorials, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, this is an ideal situation. Now, this student, by the time they hit the following cycle, which is this audit lecture, they would have done 90%, if not 100% of the tutorials. They would have covered all the work. This student would be ready to write a test at this point when the cycle starts again at 10. They'll be able to write a test for all their subjects because they've effectively studied. And that's the key, is that you should work consistently. You don't work hard now because you're going to write a test, but you work consistently throughout the period. Okay, so that was the example, guys. Hopefully that was helpful. Let's go back to our slideshow. And hopefully this session was helpful and now you've understood how the 24-hour rule works. Please feel free to comment and share what your views are and what you feel about the video. If you'd like other videos in the future on other specific areas or learning areas, let me know. But until we see each other next time, bye. Thank you and see you next time.